Welcome once again to another edition of Quoth the Raven, who is Bright Raven, Weekend Movie and TV Talk Edition. Today is April 8th, 2022, and as you may know, my regular scheduled guest host, John Norris, had surgery today, and he can't be with us on the show, although he is in the chat, and here he is saying good evening. So we're glad that you're back from your surgery and doing well enough to type anyway. And so we have a special guest this week, and I want to introduce you to him right now. He's known as MonsterFan.
How you doing?
We're doing okay. Now, MonsterFan's one of our regular chat members. He usually comes in when we're talking kaiju films or classic monster films, and his brother, another regular pop culture Avenger, was like, hey, you should get him on. so I said, okay, we'll talk to him. And here he is. So we're going to talk about some classic Universal films. But before we do that, you are a big fan of the Universal brand. Tell us a little bit about your fandom.
Well, I grew up with the Shock package out of Channel 5 out of New York City. Every Saturday evening would have one of them on Creature Feature during the mid late 60s, and my whole family would gather around the TV on a Saturday night and watch a fantasy film and eat a pizza. And I've always been a fan of these movies and always have tried to learn more about them. And when home video started, I quickly began to collect the movies. As many of them as I could, and still do to this day. They used to be on VHS tape, and now they're on Blu-ray. So,
well, so you probably got them 2 or 3 versions then.
I have many versions. My favorite versions, honestly, were the laser discs. I love laser discs. I still love laser discs. I wish they had not disappeared.
Wow, that was a very brief period of time.
Yeah. And I was a real active collector during those years.
That makes sense.
So
okay, well, let's see what we got this week. We start with one of your favorites, I believe.
Yes.
Bride of Frankenstein.
Yes, I'm very excited to be here talking with you about one of my all-time favorite movies.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and let you read the graphic, if you can.
All right. So we got The Bride of Frankenstein, directed by the great James Whale. The screenplay was by William Hurlbut. The story by Hurlbut and John L. Balderston, based on a premise suggested by the novel Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Produced by Carl Laemmle Jr. And of course starred Karloff as the monster, Elsa Lanchester as his bride, Colin Clive as the scientist, the beautiful Valerie Hobson as his wife, the great Ernest Thesiger as Dr. Pretorius, E. Clive as the mayor.
Yes.
And produced by Universal and distributed by Universal, with a running time of only an hour and 15 minutes. It goes rapid. It's a rapid movie. Before you know it, it's over. It was released April 20th, 1935 in the United States.
Actually, that's the national release. It was released either in New York or California the day before.
Okay.
But I just went with the national. Okay. Mm-hmm. And again, we'll go ahead and let you read what it's about.
So, on a stormy night, Percy Shelley and Lord Byron, the two great romantic poets, praise Mary Shelley for her story of Frankenstein and his monster. And she reminds them that her intention in writing that novel was to impart a moral lesson, the consequences of a mortal man who tries to play God. Mary says she has more of the story to tell, and the scene then shifts to the very end of the 31 Frankenstein film, the story being set in about 1899, which means that she's telling a story almost 100 years in the future, since they got together that summer to write these stories. I believe it was in 1815 or 1816. So the film is projecting her quite a ways ahead.
Mm-hmm.
So villagers gather around the burning windmill to cheer the apparent death of the monster. Hans, the father of the girl the creature accidentally drowned in the previous film, wants to see the monster's bones. He falls accidentally into the flooded pit underneath the mill, where the monster, having survived the fire, though somewhat burned, strangles him. Hauling himself from the pit, the monster casts Hans's wife to her death. He next encounters Minnie, who flees in terror in a very amusing scene.
Yes.
The body of Henry Frankenstein, who was thought to have died at the windmill, is returned to his fiancée Elizabeth at his ancestral castle home. Minnie arrives to sound the alarm about the monster, but her warning goes unheeded. Elizabeth, seeing Henry move, realizes he is still alive. So this was how they got around the ending of the first movie, by bringing back both main characters. Nursed back to health by Elizabeth, Henry has renounced his creation, but still believes he may be destined to unlock the secrets of life and immortality. A hysterical Elizabeth cries that she foresees death. Henry visits the lab of his former mentor, Dr. Septimus Pretorius, where Pretorius shows Henry, in just a most marvelously enchanting scene, several homunculi he has created. Little humanoid creatures in these glass tubes.
Mm-hmm.
Pretorius wishes to work with Henry to create a mate for the monster, with the proposed venture involving Pretorius growing an artificial brain while Henry gathers parts for the mate. Meanwhile, the monster saves a young shepherdess from drowning. Her screams upon seeing him alert two hunters, who shoot and injure the monster. The hunters raise a mob that sets out in pursuit. Captured and trussed onto a pole, the monster is hauled to a dungeon and chained. Left alone, he breaks his chains, overpowers the guards, and escapes into the woods.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break right there. John says he's ashamed he's never seen this film. So I guess we picked the right ones, didn't we? Because this is one.
Yeah, it's Bride of Frankenstein is got to be one of the pinnacles of fantastic cinema in classic Hollywood.
Now, one thing we want to talk about briefly is the symbolism that is going on in this film. When Frankenstein is put on the pole, it's like, and dragged to the dungeons, it's like Christ being pulled across on the cross before he.
Yeah, that is certainly how it's always been interpreted. Yeah,
and it's very interesting because when we get into the discussion about thoughts on this film ran afoul of censorship massively, and for some reason this was allowed, but other things weren't, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it didn't make sense what it was allowed and what wasn't.
Yeah, there's no accounting for what got censored and what got through.
Okay. Do you want to continue or you want me to continue?
You go ahead.
Okay. That night, following the sound of a violin playing, the monster encounters an old blind hermit who thanks God for sending him a friend. He teaches the monster words like friend and good and shares a meal with him. The two lost hunters stumble upon the cottage and recognize the monster. He attacks them and in the process accidentally burns down the cottage as the hunters leave and take the hermit with them away from the fire. Taking refuge from another angry mob in a crypt, the monster spies Pretorius and his cronies, Carl and Ludwig, breaking open a grave. The henchmen depart as Pretorius stays to enjoy a light supper. The monster approaches Pretorius and learns that Pretorius plans to create a mate for him. Cut to Henry and Elizabeth, who are now married. They are visited by Pretorius. When Henry expresses his refusal to assist with Pretorius' plans, Pretorius then calls in the monster, who demands Henry's help. Henry again refuses, and Pretorius orders the monster out, but he gives him a secret signal that tells him to kidnap Elizabeth. Pretorius guarantees her safe return upon Henry's participation in his plan. So Henry returns to his tower laboratory where, despite himself, he grows excited over his work. After being assured of Elizabeth's safety, he completes the bride's body. A storm soon rages as final preparations are made to bring the bride to life. Her bandage-wrapped body is raised to the roof, where electricity is harnessed from lightning to animate her. Henry and Pretorius lower her after her body's been shocked by the lightning strike, and after realizing their success in bringing her to life, they remove her bandages and help her to stand. The monster comes down the steps of the tower after killing Carl up on the rooftop and sees his mate. The excited monster reaches out to her and asks, "Friend?" The bride, seeing him screaming, rejects him. The dejected monster observes, "She hate me, like others." As Elizabeth races to Henry's side, the monster rampages throughout the laboratory, destroying things and causing basically a beginning of a fire. When Pretorius warns that the monster's actions will destroy them all, the monster pauses and tells Henry and Elizabeth, "Go, you live, go, but to Pretorius and the bride, you stay. We belong dead." As Henry and Elizabeth flee, the monster looks at the bride, sheds a tear, and pulls a lever to trigger the laboratory and the tower's destruction. And we see the couple, escape and watch as everything goes to hell. Yep. As I said, this film has a very interesting history. Originally, the director, James Whale, wanted nothing to do with this film. And it took considerable doings to get him on board. Then it took 7 writers and 5 different scripts before he finally approved a shooting script. This is because Whale had felt he had done all there was to be done with this story back in the original 1931 movie. So he really had to be convinced, and he was really quite skeptical even while filming. Now, there have been speculation that there were treatments in the script where Elizabeth would have been the donor for the bride's heart. But that claim has been refuted by film historian Scott McQueen and a couple of others as well. Sources also report that Bela Lugosi and Claude Rains were considered for the role of Pretorius, but others claim that the role was created specifically for Ernest. How's his last name pronounced?
Well, I pronounce it Thesiger.
Thesiger, okay. Of course, because of Mae Clarke's ill health, Mae played Elizabeth in the original film in 1931. Valerie Hobson replaced her as Elizabeth in this film. Whale decided that the same actress cast to play the bride should also play Mary Shelley in the film's prologue to represent how the story and the horror genre in general springs from the dark side of the imagination. Before Elsa Lanchester, actresses Bridget Helm and Phyllis Brooks had been considered. Lanchester herself, who had accompanied her husband Charles Laughton to Hollywood from London, had met only moderate success in Hollywood, while Laughton had had some pretty strong performances with films such as The Private Life of Henry VIII, for which he had won an Oscar, and Whale's own film, The Old Dark House. Lanchester was kind of depressed about this, and she had returned alone to London and was on the verge of retiring from acting entirely when Whale contacted her for this dual role. And this, of course, became her career's iconic role. So I guess that was a meant-to-be situation.
Yep.
Lanchester modeled the bride's hissing on the hissing of swans, which is quite an interesting way to do it. She gave herself a sore throat, however, while filming the hissing sequence in the film, because Whale shot that from multiple angles. In fact, it was rumored as many as 17 different angles, which is quite a lot for that. Colin Clive and Boris Karloff, of course, reprised their roles from the original Frankenstein film as creator and creation, respectively. However, there was much concern about Clive's part in the film because he was battling alcoholism, and the studio kind of wanted to cut him out of the film, but Wales stood up for him and demanded Clive be the character because of the manic persona that Clive performed in the first film. He felt was a necessary element to the character's portrayal. And that's kind of true because back when in the scenes where he starts building the body for the bride, you get that same kind of manic obsession that he got in the first film. So Whale was probably correct in that assessment. However, Karloff himself hated the decision to have the monster speak, and he objected to it, and ultimately he got overruled. This is as good as this was not Karloff's favorite film by any means. Because he had a speaking role, Karloff had to keep his dental plate in, which changed his appearance as the monster significantly, as his sunken cheeks that you might have recognized in the first film were filled by the plate. Karloff famously commented, "Speech, stupid. My argument was that if the monster had any impact or charm, it was because he was inarticulate. This great, lumbering, inarticulate creature. The moment he spoke, you might as well play it straight." And the pause is actually a cut because he actually cussed in the actual quote. Of course, Boris is simply credited as Karloff at this time because he was at the height of his career, and just the name Karloff meant box office draw. Elsa Lanchester, of course, is credited for playing Mary Shelley in this film, but in a nod to the original 31 film for Frankenstein, the bride is only credited as a question mark. Of course, if you watch the film, you know that they're the same actress, but it's just like Karloff was cast as a question mark in the Frankenstein monster. Universal makeup Jack Pierce also had a lot of work to this. He had to do special attention to the monster's appearance in this film. He altered the 1931 design to display the after effects of the mill fire, which, as MonsterFan pointed out, that was really well done when they had that scene. Added some scars, and it shortened the monster's hair, and he had burns up his hands and arms as well. Over the course of the filming, Pierce then would modify the monster's makeup to indicate that the monster's injuries were healing as the film progressed, which, when you think about it, for that time period is genius.
Yeah.
In fact, today they probably wouldn't even think about doing something like that. That's part of why with some of the films that we watch, we kind of laugh at them or smirk at them because they aren't done well and thought of like that. Mm-hmm. Pierce also created the bride's makeup with strong input from Whale, especially regarding the bride's iconic hairstyle, which was based on statues and busts of Egyptian Queen Nefertiti. Lanchester's hair was given a Marcel wave over a wire frame to achieve the style. However, Lanchester disliked working with Pierce, who she said really did feel that he made these people. In other words, he had this attitude that he made the character, he made the actor famous. Like he was the one doing it, not the performer. And in the morning, he'd be dressed in white as if he were in a hospital to perform an operation. She also disliked the costume for the bride. I drank as little liquid as possible. It was too much of an ordeal to try to go to the bathroom because of all those bandages and having them to be accompanied by my dresser to get undressed and redressed. So yeah, you could tell she did not exactly have fun with the role in that regard. Kenneth Strickfaden, who most people don't know, he's a set designer and prop designer. He created and maintained the laboratory equipment and recycled a number of fancifully named machines that he had created from the original Frankenstein for use in this film, including the cosmic ray diffuser and the nebularium. A lightning bolt generated by Strickfaden's equipment has become a stock scene. You've seen the lightning strike raising up between the two poles. That's appeared in any number of films and television shows with mad scientist labs and stuff like that. He's the one responsible for that. Now we get into the fun part. The Bride of Frankenstein was subjected to censorship, both during production by the Hays office and following its release by local and national censorship boards. The lead censor for the Hays office, Joseph Breen, objected to lines of dialogue in the originally submitted script in which Henry Frankenstein and his work were compared to that of God, which was kind of the point. The guy is, fancying himself that and comparing himself to that. That was kind of the point of the story. He continued to object to such dialogue in multiple revised scripts, and then to a planned shot of the monster rushing through a graveyard to a figure of a crucified Jesus and attempting to rescue the figure from the cross. Now, if you're going to keep the scene where he's drugged through whoops, he's in the dark. I don't blame you. Where he's drugged on the cross himself to the dungeon. Why do you get this one out where he's actually trying to rescue the figure of Christ?
I think it's a real shame that this scene was evidently never filmed, or if it was filmed, it was cut early on and is now lost to history. I think it would have been quite something to see. I think in the film you can actually see a point at which the monster, before he goes into the crypt where he meets Pretorius, is wandering in the graveyard, and you see a couple of the large crucifixes that are attached to the tombstones, and it's probably one of those that was the planned rescue attempt was going to be made. And it's a shame that we can't see that today. I think it would have been incredibly poignant and quite a remarkable piece of filmmaking.
Okay. Breen also objected to the number of murders, both seen and implied by the script, and he strongly advised Whale to reduce the number of them. And at the time of when this was being filmed, this was reportedly the most censored film of the Universal Monsters era, and even at that time in film history. That's how many complaints there were. It was like this guy Breen just had it in for this movie.
Well, this, remember, is about a years into the Hays Code. So there's all these rules that were now being pretty strictly enforced, and it could make it very difficult for a director to tell the story effectively. So I kind of get the impression that Breen wanted to make an example of this film, that they weren't going to be allowing any of this crazy, murderous, violent stuff to be on American screens and pollute the youth of the country any further.
Yeah, it's like, you kind of wonder, did Wortham later on with Seduction of the Innocent get his whole shtick from Breen? It's so similar in the attitudes and stuff that was going on with both of those guys that it's crazy. I'm going to have to probably get a copy of the Hays Code and Seduction of the Innocent and do a side-by-side comparison to show just how similar these mindsets were.
They really were, actually, if you look at it. They are very similar.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Then he also didn't have a problem with the presentation of Pretorius as a coded homosexual either.
I yield to you on your knowledge of those issues. I just find him a fascinating character.
Oh no, the character's great. I'm just saying, um, when they mean coded, it's you have to understand what they're doing to pick it up, basically. So it's kind of like a lot of stuff that was in the comics in the 60s and 70s. There were homosexual characters; it just wasn't spelled out for you. So if you weren't looking for it, it probably went over your head. Right. So maybe that's what happened here as well. Anyway, The Bride of Frankenstein was approved by the Production Code Office on April 15th, 1935. But that was just the beginning of the fight. Even though it had the code seal of approval, first the film was challenged by the censorship board in the state of Ohio. And
that's my state.
And they pulled it for 2.5 weeks while they argued. And eventually the film was released in Ohio, but without any further ado, but they had to go to court to get it released in Ohio, which is ridiculous. Then there were censors in England and China who objected to the scene in which the monster gazes longingly upon the body intended for reanimation as a bride, citing concerns that it looked like necrophilia. Which, okay, I suppose, because it kind of is.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't recognize any of Pretorius's coding when I was a kid, but I did recognize that scene of his looking at that corpse as a what's his idea there? Even when I was a boy, I knew that was a little different.
And your brother says hello to everyone.
I thought he was at a book auction tonight.
He probably is at a book auction, but I guess he's probably just looking down at his phone or something.
Oh, yeah, it could be on the phone, yeah.
And then John says hi to Pop. And yeah. Whoops, there we go. Let's see. There's still even more censorship issues. Universal had to voluntarily withdraw the film from Sweden entirely because there were extensive cuts demanded by the country. And then the film was rejected outright in Trinidad, Palestine, and Hungary for various reasons. Additionally, yeah, this film was something else. Japanese censors objected to the scene in which Pretorius chases his miniature Henry VIII with tweezers, asserting that it constituted making a fool out of a king.
I did not know that.
I'm like, it makes you wonder what the censors of that era would think of today's movies, doesn't it?
I can't imagine.
I mean, yeah. No, you can't. No. This, no. But this was the big to do. I mean, this is, something that was, surprisingly that. And I think because of all the censorship issues, despite the fact that this was actually one of the best films of 1935, it completely missed any nominations for any awards, which is a crime, frankly.
Horror films have always been denigrated by the Academy.
That's true too. Yeah,
I don't think there was. I don't after what's his name? I'm going blank here. One for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I don't think there was another Best Actor winner until Silence of the Lambs main actor won.
Yeah. Okay. Right. There have also been numerous attempts to remake this film, especially in the last decade, with both Angelina Jolie and Scarlett Johansson as potential casting for the lead role. David, I don't know.
Angelina Jolie wouldn't need to change her makeup very much. I mean, she kind of looks like a scarecrow. I mean, she could.
David Koepp is still attached to the development of it as writer, but as of this point, it seems to be stuck in limbo. In fact, Universal seems to have shut down their whole Universal relaunch because the Mummy that they did failed in more recent years, so they weren't too happy.
Yeah.
So, but if you think is that film wasn't all that great, so if that was the kind of thing they were going to do,
right,
maybe that's a good thing.
right.
So, what kind of rating do you give this film?
I think that, as I said, I think this film is one of the true fantasy classics of the classical Hollywood period. I would give it 5 out of 5 stars or 10 out of 10, whatever gradation you're using. I would give it.
I'm going 5.
Just about to the full amount. I don't think it can be really. There's very few films equal or better than it.
I agree, especially for its era. I give it 4.5. I don't think it's quite as good as its predecessor in story. But if you take it, I guess this was just, I'm comparing it too much to the first film, which I did give a 5. And it's just a little bit less than the original, in my opinion.
Okay.
So that's why I gave it 4.5. But a 5 is certainly deservable. Frederick March, I think, is
Frederick March, right?
Yeah. Okay. So that is our discussion of The Bride of Frankenstein. We have one more film this evening to discuss. You need to go ahead and answer that?
No. It's just an email or something.
Okay. Phantom of the Opera from 1943. This is the remake of the 25 film that featured Lon Chaney, and we will talk about the 25 film briefly before we get too much into the storyline. But it was directed by Arthur Lubin, screenplay by Samuel Hoffenstein and Eric Taylor, with a story by John Jacobi based on The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. Produced by George Wagner, starring Claude Rains, Nelson Eddy, Susanna Foster, Edgar Barrier, Leo Carrillo, Jane Farrar, J. Edward Bromberg, Hume Cronin, and more. Production company and distribution by Universal Pictures. This was released August 27th, 1943, with an hour, 32-minute time, and it was rated approved, which means, again, the code thing. They didn't have PG, R, etc. at that time. Now, we're not going to get into what it's about just yet. We want to talk a little bit about the original 1925 film with Lon Chaney and why this took so long, and they went completely away from the Lon Chaney version of the film, because this is a completely different film. Whereas Lon Chaney's silent film in the 20s was a legitimate horror type film, this is sort of a mix of a horror film with a musical. And I know you think of it more of a musical than a horror film.
Yes, I think it is. I think it is a musical, basically, and the horror elements are much attenuated from the Chaney version, and it's just even today it's difficult for me to sit through it. It's just not much going on, and you can see on the ad in the cast list, the actor that plays the Phantom is third on the list. Because the singers come first, and
yes,
and that's truly how it was in the film, unfortunately.
Yes. Okay. What it's about? Violinist Enrique Claudine is dismissed from the Paris Opera House after revealing that he is losing the use of his fingers in his left hand. Unbeknownst to the conductor, however, who assumes Claudine can support himself, this musician has used all of his money to help anonymously fund voice lessons for Christine Dubois, a young soprano to whom he is devoted. Your brother says he's never seen this version of the Phantom of the Opera. Interesting. Meanwhile, Christine is pressured by Inspector Raoul Dubert to quit the opera and marry him, but famed opera baritone Anatole Garon hopes to win Christine's heart. So basically, Christine has 3 guys pining after her. Christine considers both Raoul and Anatole to be good friends, but she doesn't openly express if she loves either of them. And she doesn't know about Enrique liking her because he's doing it anonymously. In a desperate attempt to earn money, Claudine submits a piano concerto that he has written for publication. After weeks of not hearing a response about his concerto, he becomes worried and returns to the publisher, Maurice Pleyel, to ask about it. Pleyel rudely tells him to leave. But then Claudine hears his concerto being played in the office and is convinced that Pleyel is trying to steal it. Unbeknownst to him, a visiting Franz Liszt has been playing it and is endorsing this concerto and is planning to basically buy and pay handsomely for it. Enraged, Claudine strangles Pleyel. The publisher's assistant, or Georgette, the publisher's assistant, throws etching acid in Claudine's face, which horribly scars him, and he flees. Now wanted for murder, Claudine flees into the sewers of the opera and covers his disfigurement with a prop mask that he's stolen from the opera house, thus becoming the Phantom of the Opera. Cut to a performance of the opera Amour el Gloire. The Phantom drugs a glass of wine, which prima donna, that's the lead female performer, Mademoiselle Biancaroli, drinks, which knocks her unconscious. The director then puts Christine in her place, and Christine dazzles the audience with her singing. Biancaroli, who suspects that Garon and Christine are responsible for drugging her, orders that Raoul arrest them, but he says he cannot because there is no evidence. Biancaroli says she will forget the affair only if Christine's performance is not mentioned in the papers. So it isn't mentioned in the papers, and then the following night, the Phantom subsequently kills Biancaroli and her maid, and that subsequently closes down the opera house because there's an investigation of the murder. John Norris says he hasn't seen this version of the Phantom in a long time, but it didn't hold his attention very well either. So I think he's along similar thoughts as you. Yep. After some time, the opera's owners then receive a note demanding that Christine replace Biancaroli. In order to catch the Phantom, Raoul comes up with a plan. Not let Christine sing during a performance of the fictional Russian opera, The Prince Masqué du Caucasus, which is the masked prince of the Caucasus. I can't say that word. To lure the Phantom out into the open. Garon plans to have Liszt play Claudine's concerto after the performance, but the Phantom strangles one of Raoul's men and heads to the auditorium's domed ceiling. He then brings down a large chandelier over on top of the audience, causing chaos. As the audience and crew flee, the Phantom takes Christine down underground. He tells Christine that he loves her, and now she will sing all she wants, but only for him. Raoul, Anatole, and the police then begin pursuing them underground. Just as the Phantom and Christine arrive to his lair, they hear Liszt and the orchestra playing Claudine's concerto. The Phantom plays along with it on his piano. Christine watches and realizes that the concerto was written around the melody of a lullaby she has known since she was a child. Raoul and Anatole hear the Phantom playing his piano, and they follow the sound. Overjoyed from getting this recognition and that Christine is realizing what he has done for her, he urges her to sing, which she does. While the Phantom is distracted by the music, she sneaks up and pulls off of his mask, revealing his disfigured face. At that same moment, Raoul and Anatole break into the lair. Claudine grabs a sword to fight them with. Raoul fires his gun at Claudine, but Anatole knocks Raoul's arm, and the shot hits the ceiling, causing a cave-in. Anatole and Raoul escape with Christine, while Claudine is seemingly crushed to death by the falling rocks. Cut to a little bit later, and Anatole and Raoul both demand that Christine choose one of them. She surprises them by choosing to marry neither of them, instead choosing to pursue her singing career inspired by Claudine's devotion to her future. And the film ends with Anatole and Raoul going to dinner together because, well, I guess they're going to give up on the girl. They might as well be a gay couple or something. But it was kind of a silly ending, I thought. Yeah, it's not the best version.
No, it's not. You're right. It's a silly ending to a insipid movie.
But again, this is, of course, the remake. I do think the story in this is a little bit stronger, but it's just not presented well. Because there is a little more storyline to explain relationships between the different characters. But the Claude Rains mask makes the character much more human than what Lon Chaney's character was. And Lon Chaney's Phantom is more dramatically effective than Claude Rains is in this film. You're just not scared of Claude Rains at all.
And he was a short man as well, so you never got the feeling that he was a towering figure of menace.
Right. Again, much like Bride of Frankenstein, this film had a hard time getting made as well. It was originally slated for 8 years earlier, in 1935. The Phantom was originally going to be a psychologically wounded World War I veteran who was physically unharmed but imagined himself disfigured. This, of course, languished in development until Carl Laemmle and his son were ousted from Universal Picture Studios, in which it was then subsequently axed completely. Then in 1941, they tried again with a different screenplay in which the Phantom was Christine's father. This too failed to get the backing from the studio, despite having Boris Karloff as the Phantom, which would have been the towering, frightening presence. And they had Alan Jones as Raoul. Unfortunately, though, who they wanted to cast as Christine, she was not really into this thing at all. I'm trying to remember who it was that they wanted. Deanna Durbin, that's who it was. And I don't know exactly why she refused. I guess it was because originally they were going to have another person cast in as Raoul, and she didn't want to be compared to Eddie's frequent film partner, Jeanette MacDonald, because MacDonald was someone she was considered a friend and didn't want to cause hard feelings. So while they were looking for a new person to cast in the role, Karloff's schedule got filled up and he became unavailable. And so they went through several different people to try and replace him, including Cesar Romero, Theodore Chaplin, Charles Lawton, and Broderick Crawford for Phantom, but nobody stuck. They really
could you imagine Broderick Crawford as a Phantom?
Yeah.
Talk about miscasting.
Yeah. Ultimately, though, George Wagner just fired Henry Koster, who was going to be the director, and put it on ice again until Lubin was brought in to direct. They did try to bring back Karloff, but they couldn't make it work. The schedule was just, he was too busy. And they got rid of the idea of Christine's father because it gave the romantic elements of the relationship incestuous overtones, which, of course, the Hays Code would have been. But then again, in this version, the Phantom's obsession with Christine is not really that well stated within the film. It's more about, well, I want to see her be successful as a singer, not madly in love and wanting the person, which I think does also weaken the film because, of course, Chaney's version wanted the girl. Somehow, though, Lubin cast Rains in this film as the Phantom almost immediately, saying it was his only choice. So I don't know what Lubins was thinking, but he did.
Well, he has a marvelous voice.
Yeah. So I guess that's probably.
Yeah, I'm thinking that must be what they were looking to is his voice, which was second to none in Hollywood. So
yeah, that's fair. That makes sense. Ironically, though, as bad as this film was, and it got mixed reviews. Basically, if you accept it as a musical, it works on its own terms. But like you say yourself, as a classic Universal horror fan, it's basically just not there.
It's a real weak tea.
Yeah.
It's just not.
But ironically, they actually were going to make a sequel to this film.
Yeah.
I don't know if you knew that.
I did know that.
Okay. It's called The Climax, which is a hilarious name. Yeah.
And they did get Karloff for that. Karloff is in that movie.
Yeah.
And if it's anything, it's even worse than Phantom is. So.
Yes. Nelson Eddy and Susanna Foster were to return, along with Claude Rains as a Phantom, which meant his character would have survived the cave-in at the finale of the first film. But they decided that this story wasn't going to work, so they canceled it and reworked the film completely so that it has nothing to do with Phantom of the Opera, but it still has Foster as the lead, and of course, like you say, Boris Karloff is in the film, but it has nothing. There's no story to this at all. It's crazy. This film did get 4 Oscar Award nominations, and it did win for art direction and cinematography.
The sets are spectacular. I have to give it that. They're gorgeous Technicolor sets, really beautifully done, and well worthy of the Oscar for that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it unfortunately, as well as those sets are, I don't see why those sets were that much more spectacular than the set, say, for Bride of Frankenstein, for the lab and other things. And those weren't nominated. But like you say, those were horror films. This is more of a musical. I don't know. Because this is the only Universal monster film that has ever received any Oscar nominations or wins. So that's kind of why we brought this in to discuss it, was because of that irony. Probably the worst one of the lot is the one that wins all the accolades. It's, I don't know, what does that say about that? The irony of the hypocrisy of Hollywood, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Hollywood has, people talk about how bad modern Hollywood is, but it was always bad. It was always problematic, and a lot of wonderful artistic things got overlooked, even in the classic years of Hollywood.
Now, you gave this film only 2 stars. Mm-hmm.
I give it those 2 stars for the sets, and the cinematography is superb. But as a story, as a horror film, as a mystery, as a fantasy, unlike the Chaney original, it just doesn't do it for me.
Yeah, I understand totally. I'm a little bit more lenient. I gave it 3.5.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. I think because given what they were trying to do, you know, I guess I was judging it more for what it was than what it wasn't. Does that make sense?
No, I think that's a fair point. I always dislike critics who complain about what a film or book or whatever isn't, rather than what it is. So your point is a good one. Well taken.
But at the same time, I mean, when you compare what was going on in the 40s and what they were trying to do and all the trouble they had making this film, I don't think they could have done a 1-to-1 ratio of what Chaney did and remake it or continue the Chaney version, especially not with Claude in the role. I mean, you would have had to have had Chaney Jr. take over if Chaney wasn't available. But I'm not sure if they would have been able to do the same type of visual dramatic performance that Chaney was able to do in silent film in a talk film.
Right.
Yeah. And because that's a big part of what made the silent film in 25 what it was that it's not just the makeup. Obviously, the makeup was amazing. Chaney was a master. But it was the way he was able to embody the character physically. Yes, he was tall, but it's the way he carried his body.
Yes.
It was, he would be tall in one things and slunched over in others, and just he knew how to twist his body to get certain effects on a camera that most actors just don't have any comprehension of how to do that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah.
And so I don't know if anybody could have actually redone that in the modern. Maybe, I mean, today, the guy who plays Gollum could do it. Andy Serkis.
Andy Serkis, yeah.
He could probably pull it off.
Yeah.
But, would anybody want to put him in the lead? I mean, they probably, we'll make him a CGI character. That's what they do, unfortunately.
Yeah, that is what they do, unfortunately. Yeah.
But that's really a shame because Andy is actually not just a superb actor, but I mean, he gets hidden somewhat behind the CGI, so it's we don't really get to see the whole of the performance in the same way. But I would love to see something like that if they were going to remake this particular property in a modern. That would be one of my top guys for consideration. Who would you consider for Phantom of the Opera if they made a new one today?
Oh, wow. I've really not given it much thought. Probably, although he's getting on in years now, I would think Lance Hendrickson could do a good job.
That's not a bad choice. Yeah. Okay. That would definitely have to go back to the original version, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I could see that. Okay. And again, they don't have the same thing with this one because Phantom's like a little bit down below on the scale of the more popular ones. I think he's like, 6th or 7th down the list. It's like Dracula, Werewolf, Frankenstein, The Mummy, and then probably Phantom after that, right? That's 5th.
Yeah, maybe people would put Creature from the Black Lagoon ahead of him.
Yeah, there you go, Creature. So that would make, that Creature about Phantom. So again, that's like 6th or 7th place.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they probably haven't even got that on their schedule in Universal.
Yeah, I would go so far as to say probably a good sound version of Phantom has never been made.
Yeah.
It's been tried a bunch of times. Hammer tried to do it back in 62. And it takes more from this 43 version than it does from the Cheney version. And,
yeah. Patrick says he's proud to be a Cheney.
Hi, Patrick.
And John says, I've always wondered what 1925 audiences must have felt when they saw Cheney's big reveal. Yeah, because that was a different time. I mean,
yeah, and it was not advertised.
Right.
The set was kept closed and no one knew about it until the film actually premiered. So
yeah.
I'm sure people of those days were shocked. I still think it's a pretty shocking scene, even today.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, I can remember when I first saw it was probably around 75, 76. So I was like 3 or 4 years old when I first saw it.
As was I. I was 2 or 3 years old, yes. And I saw it, believe it or not, in those days, they actually had silent films on TV back in the early 60s, mid 60s. And my father and mother showed it to me, and it scared the bejesus out of me. I slept with them that night.
I thought he looked funny when I first saw him at first. I was like, what is that supposed to be? But I actually thought he got a little more creepier the older I got.
Yes.
Whereas I think, when we're young enough, we don't know we're supposed to be afraid of stuff. It just, it goes over our heads or something, don't recognize it as that. But, kind of like the little girl who befriends Frankenstein, doesn't know to be afraid of it and just gives him the flower type, type thing.
That's a good point.
Yeah. John says, of course, now people think of the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical,
which I'm happy to say I have never seen. It's also that film is also a romance.
Yeah.
There's like isn't there an explicit romance between the Phantom and the singer?
I'm not sure. I haven't watched that one either.
I think so. Yeah. I much prefer the Phantom as the bizarre, monstrous creature that Cheney created.
Yeah. Well, like I said, the climax that they did that. I mean, what they did with the plot of the climax. I mean, Karloff is a doctor who murders his fiancée, who's the prima donna opera singer, out of obsession and jealousy, and then 10 years later, he hears another young singer played by Susanna Foster, who reminds him of his fiancée he killed. So now he's going to get her and make her sing only for him, or kill her. It's so far away that it's like, why was this made?
Right.
But then this was actually made by Wagner, so I guess Wagner wasn't happy with what was made in 43. So a year later he tried to make it what he wanted, I guess.
Another point worth mentioning is Susanna Foster was 18 years old when she made this movie, and her co-star Nelson Eddy was in his 50s, I believe. So for them to even have a suggestion of having a romance is like, that's as bad as the Phantom.
Yeah. Well, how old was Claude in that? He wasn't that old.
No, he must have been in his 50s. I don't think he was in his late 40s, maybe. I don't know.
Let me check real quick.
He was very young when he did Invisible Man.
Right. Okay. Well, let's see. Well, no, he was old, I guess. Let's see. Let me get. Whoop, that's not the right thing I want. Let's see. 1940. He was 54.
Okay.
So, yeah. So that was a little bit surprising. I didn't think he was that old at that time, but I guess he was. And he wasn't that short, but he was shorter than most leading actors at the time. I mean, he's only, 5'7" isn't short, really, but it's short for actors, I guess. But I don't know. But
Ingrid Bergman recounted how in one of their films together, she had to walk in a ditch that was off camera so that he was at the same height as her. So he certainly felt short.
I really did. Of course, Ingrid Bergman was tall. I mean,
yes, right.
I mean, she was 5'9" out of heels. So you figure in heels, she was at least 6 foot tall. So yeah, that would be kind of what would happen, unfortunately. That's crazy. But but that's our unreasonable Hollywood expectations of our performers. Everybody's got to be tall and built and statuesque,
and beautiful. And one other thing that may be of interest to some of your regular listeners, if they read fantasy fiction, is the actor who played Franz Liszt was a man called Fritz Leiber, who was the father of the great fantasy author Fritz Leiber Jr.
Mm-hmm.
And the father had been a noted Shakespearean actor and appeared in a number of classic Hollywood films, including this one.
Right. And of course, Junior is the author of Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser.
Grey Mouse, yes.
That whole franchise, which if you're a modern comics fan, if you like Jim Zub and you like Skull Kickers, that's where he swiped it from. Was that kind of stuff. So
yeah, I'm surprised they've never gotten a TV show.
Which ones?
Fafhrd and the Mouser.
Yeah, that's a good point. Probably just a little bit too violent. Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe.
Of course, then again, they could always do it like what's his name, who did Hercules and the Heroic Journeys or whatever with his pal Aeolus. They could do something like that. And it wouldn't be quite so violent.
Right.
They could adapt it. So, yeah. Okay. That's our 2 films for tonight. I want to thank you all for watching. I want to thank MonsterFan for coming on short notice.
I want to thank you for inviting me on. It's been a real honor to sit and talk with you about these wonderful old films.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to have you back. We just got to find the right topic. We've been discussing it before the show. Maybe we'll get into some kaiju films because he's a big kaiju fan, and or maybe we'll talk a little bit about modern manga versus classic manga or something. But have you watched some of the stuff that John and I have talked about with the anime? Some of the episodes?
I've watched some of your shows about them, yeah.
Okay.
But I have not had the time to pursue reading them up.
Reading. All right. And John says, great episode, guys. And I'm sure he appreciates you stepping in for him.
Thanks, John. I hope you're feeling better.
And we're going to go ahead and call it an evening here, but I'm waiting for this silly thing to do what it's supposed to do. My computer always wants to fight at the end. If you enjoyed this episode or you think others might, please hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons to continue to get content from this channel. As always, I thank you for watching and for your support. If you want to reach out to me on social media, I'm available at lewis.bretraven on Facebook, at lewisbretrave2 on Twitter. You can see some of my artwork at deviantart.com/brightraven. You've been watching Quoth the Raven, Lewis Bright Raven exclusively on YouTube. If you have questions, comments, you want to commission some artwork from me, suggestions for an episode in the future, Quoth the Raven, LBR72@gmail.com is the email address to reach out to me at. And if I don't get back to you within a day or so, try lewisbrightraven@yahoo.com. Is there any place that you want people to contact you at, perhaps?
No. I mean, I don't really have any. I'm on Instagram, MonsterFan1933.
Okay.
If anyone wants to contact me, that's probably the easiest way to do it.
Okay. Yeah, because down the road, his brother, Pop Culture Avenger, and him have been talking about maybe doing a similar format type show where they're talking about classic movies or pop culture stuff. So maybe when we get down to that, I'll make an appearance on your show.
Oh, you'd be more than welcome.
Alrighty. That'll be it for tonight, guys. We'll see you next time. And Grant Laker comes in at the tail end and says, "Hey, Lewis. Hey, Grant. We're just heading out." You'll have to catch it on the replay, but thanks for stopping in. We appreciate it. We'll see you next time.